Good afternoon, everyone. In deference to those folks who are watching this live stream, I think it's best we get started. We will start with our presentation, myself and SVP Boyer, and then we'll have a question and answer segment at the end. Steve and I were going to start with a little interpretive dance number from Alvin Ailey's, one of his productions, but we decided to spare you guys that and jump right into this. No, that's okay. I have no rhythm, trust me. Okay, let's start with the university enrollment numbers. We are post-census. Census was on February 5th of this year for spring. Census happens in the fall and spring of each year. There are other reports that are run during the summers and winters as well, but this is the numbers as of the 5th of February. So I will explain the columns once. You'll see the same table repeated with other pieces of information in it, but I'll go through the columns just once. On the left side is the label, the column, the students, undergrad, grad, total, full-time, part-time. The next column is the census numbers for spring of 2019. That's there as a reference so that when you look at spring of 2020, you can sort of see how this compares to the previous spring. The numbers in between, the delta spring 19 to spring 20 is a difference between the census dates for spring 19 and 20. The spring 2020 number is the actual numbers for spring census this year. The number at the far right is the projected, or the goals that we established for 2020, and the number in between is a difference between where we landed and what the projection was. One of the things that we do when we're looking at university enrollment is we like to disaggregate the numbers so that you can sort of see what's going on. Enrollment at any university is built on continuing student population and new students admitted to the university. So let's start with continuing students. Categories are the same on the left. The spring census numbers are there. I'll sort of look at the bottom row because that's the total. So in terms of the numbers, last spring we had 8,642 students enrolled. This spring, continuing students enrolled. This spring the number is 8,506 students, a difference of 136 students. The goal for this year is 8,740. The difference between where we landed and the goal is 234 students. That was offset to some degree by the number of new students who enrolled. If you look at this particular table, the categories of students are a little bit different. We're looking at graduate, and then we're looking at all categories of undergraduate students. And the final row, all by itself, is one semester retention rate. I'll get to that in a second. In terms of the graduate numbers, we were 19 students ahead of where we were last year, but 61 students below the established goal of 350 students. We know it was a stretch goal. The idea that graduate has a lot more flexibility than some of the other undergraduate populations in spring is why we thought we could push the spring numbers for graduate. Well, we didn't achieve that goal, and that was the big difference between meeting the admissions goal for spring and not meeting the goal. In terms of freshmen, we established a goal of 40 students. We ended up with 60. The minus 20 is the difference between the goal and the actual, so we're 20 above the goal. For transfer students, the goal was 330. We ended up at 344 students. Last year we were at 326. You should note that this is the first time in 10 years that the transfer population has grown in either fall or spring. So this bodes well for us, especially as we plan for some different things at the community colleges during the recruitment cycle. So we go to the bottom of this page, all new students. Last spring, we had 827 new students enrolled. This spring, 888 students, a difference of 61. The goal, however, was 900 students, and we missed that goal by 12 students. We ended up at 888 students enrolled. Those 12 students will be added to the fall goal, so we actually think that that's reasonable. We think that we can get 12 more students than we had planned for the fall, so we will have met the admissions goal. In terms of the first semester retention, the reason why this is an important item for us, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later in the presentation, is because it's a sort of a sort of opening view as to what next fall's retention will look like for first-time full-time freshmen. So last spring, 87.5% of the freshman class returned from fall to spring, typically that number should be north of 91%. You lose most of the students that you're going to lose between spring and fall, not between fall and spring. And so a number that's below 90% is something that bears watching, and we are. However, this winter or this spring, the number is 89.1%, which is a 1.6% improvement over last year, but a 2.7% difference from what we had projected at 91.8%. So in terms of highlighting the spring, we're 227 students short of the projected spring enrollment. 191 of those students were full-time students. We missed the continuing student projection by 234 students. 303 of them were undergrads. That was offset by 69 more graduate students than projected. We missed the spring new student number by 12 students, but exceeded last year by 61 students. And we missed the spring first semester retention rate by 2.7%, but exceeded last year by 1.6%. And before I turn it over to Steve, I just want to highlight some of the things about the first semester retention rate that you should be aware of. There were improvements across the board. Where there was not an improvement, for instance, in honors, the 0.5% difference between last spring and this spring wasn't statistically significant and only represented 1 or 2 students. It's not necessarily true for white students. It's a 2.7% difference. Those are the only 2 categories that did not show an improvement over last spring. And with that, I will come back to retention a little bit later, but for now, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Boyer.
Hi, good afternoon. So what Reg was saying is that, I mean, there's some trends, some good things, some that look like the trending positive, but we've got some challenges. So I thought before I get into the actual numbers of what all the enrollment means as far as this year's budget, I thought it would be important to point out some of the historical trends that we have in enrollment in particular, and the impact on the budget. So what I'm showing is about 10 years worth of data, and it's on the macro level. And if you compare fiscal year 11 to the current fiscal year, overall there's a 12% drop in enrollment. The biggest drop in enrollment is in the undergraduate, and that's about a 15% decline over the same time period. Graduate is about 1%, so for all intents and purposes, graduate for that time period has been flat, and that's on a headcount basis. Now, if we look at it on a student credit hours, because the credit hours is what drives the income at the university, again, looking at the total for the same time period, total credit hours dropped about 13%. Largest impact was undergraduate, which is the red line, and that's about a 15% decline. And I did not disaggregate full-time from part-time, but the biggest drop we've had of that is full-time students. And that information, if you want to look at this peeled back, the fact book will provide some of that information to you. The good news is that graduate over the same time period is actually up 5% from its student credit hours. Even though the head count is down 1%, credit hours are up for that group of students by 5%. Now, the other thing that's important to us is the attrition rate, not just year to year, but fall to spring. And this chart, if you go down to the bottom that's highlighted in yellow, you can see that the attrition rate varies overall. It's 7%, but it varies from full-time undergraduate about 10%, 9.6%, and 1% up for part-time. So we've got a shifting of full-time to part-time. That's what this shows you. And the graduate is down about 2.8%. And again, this is fall to spring. This shows you that same 10-year period, with the attrition from fall to spring. And you can see it's like not consistent, particularly in the graduate area. It's been down, up, and over time, it makes it a little difficult for us on the finance side of the house to try to predict going forward what the revenue expectations of the university when we have so much fluctuation. However, there is some good sign. There is a good sign here. If you look for this past fall to spring, it's actually improved a little bit. It was previously 10%, and now this is 8.45%. So there is an improvement there in retention, and this is on student credit hours, not on head count. So what's the financial impact over the same time period? This is graduate students, and this, again, if you look at the column on the right, the actual dollar change, you can see the up and down that was reflected in the previous graph. Overall, over that 10-year period, even though headcount, it was pretty much flat over that total 10-year period, and this is an average of fall to spring, total fall, total spring divided by 2. That's how we calculate it. It's over that 10-year period, the fluctuations each year has impacted the university about $96,000. However, when we look at undergraduate, this is the big nut. The fact that we went down for over 10 years in undergraduate enrollment, you can see year to year what this has done to the budget as far as where we originally were looking at, what we would expect in enrollment. And this is what actually is a reflection of the actual enrollment year to year. And over the 10-year period, it's $34 million that the university has not had available to itself to fund all the activities that we all want to do, and even some basic things that we've had to cut back on. This is the total. It's the net of the two, $34.4 million. Now, there's a lot of information that's in the PowerPoint. This provides, and I won't go into detail, this is really providing the distribution of revenue. You can look at the PowerPoint that's online. I've presented these before. This is a distribution of revenue that the university gets from all the different components, state, grants, auxiliaries, and so forth. And you can see tuition fees is the largest component of this. And this is a distribution of how we spend the money. And this has been adjusted for the cuts that we've had to impose this year. And there's a chart further on that will show you exactly the cuts that we've had to make this year. So this is in total on a macro level, and this is by division or major grouping. So right now we're projecting by the end of the fiscal year, the university will still generate $232.8 million in revenue and expect to spend approximately that amount. There's one thing that's been added to this table, though, is if I go back to revenue, where is it? There it is. Okay. Funds from reserve, and I'll talk about that. That's not normal operating to do that, but I'll talk about why that's included. Okay, now this table shows 3 years of actuals, 2 years of actuals, and where we are with this year's budget. I broke the table up. So this is the revenue side. And what it does is you can see that we've had to adjust the budget compared to other years. And if you look at the second line from the bottom above the yellow line where it says total revenues, there's a additional number for funds from reserves. And I will talk a little bit more about that in a second. That's because we're required by the board to have a balanced budget. And this year, for a number of reasons, we're going to have to take some funds out of reserves to help balance the budget, even after the cuts that we've made this year. And these are the expenditures. This is on a macro level. Pretty much, you all know this. Our our expenditures are all about salaries because that's the kind of industry we are. And you can see it really does illustrate the fact that most of our expenditures are salary related, whether it's for full-time, part-time, or fringe benefits. Because if you don't know this, the state does cover most fringe benefits. It's for about 1,000 employees, but we also have employees and auxiliaries in particular that the state does not cover the fringe benefits. So there's about a couple of $1 million, is that right, Don, that we, $2.5 million, something like that, that we actually as a university have to cover the cost of fringe benefits. And the state charges us 50% of the salary for fringe benefits. Whether that's right or not, that's what they charge us. Okay, so this kind of shows you what we've had to do this year. And everyone in this room and every department has felt the pain, so to speak. And that's because our budget wasn't balanced. We anticipated going into the fiscal year last spring that we were going to have some challenges. So the first column, July 2019, we reduced budgets even before we opened the fiscal year 20. We reduced budgets by $1.4 million. Then fall census comes along, and we did not meet enrollment. Now, from a budgetary standpoint, we were budgeting conservatively as far as enrollment, so there's a little bit of expected attrition between the goals that admissions had and the goals that the university put into the budget. But we still did not meet either, and we had to cut budgets by 2.4%. Going to spring, we have another situation that we have to remedy. So we looked long and hard on how we could continue to cut budgets, and quite honestly, there's not much that's left to cut, particularly in the non-salary areas. I mean, there's every department, every building, every operation has basic non-salary needs. So even though we had a shortfall that we were projecting of about $1.5 million approximately in revenue, and we also had some overages in some areas that we were projecting in expenditures. You know, we were able to, all the vice presidents, the deans, we kind of went through an exercise of how we could reduce the budget, and we came up with only $768,000. So we actually had to tell the board a few weeks ago that, you know, as much as you want us to balance the budget, at this point, it does look like we might have to take money out of reserves. Now, we projected $900,000, and wasn't sure where that was going to land, because between now and the end of the year, forgetting about what we've been dealing with all the last couple of weeks, but prior to having to deal with the virus situation, with coronavirus, we thought that we would land no worse than about $900,000 as far as having to go out of the reserves to cover the difference. I was actually being conservative there. I thought we would come closer to maybe $500,000. Now things have changed now. We don't know what the impact, the additional costs associated with coronavirus for this university. We are going to be tracking those expenses, because when the governor declared a state of emergency, one of the things that helps all of us, helps the university, is it gives us the opportunity to seek funds external to the university to get reimbursed for costs that are associated with an emergency. In the past, when we've had Sandy or other natural disasters, we've been able to recoup not all expenses, but some expenses. I don't know how that's going to translate to what we submit to the state, how much we're going to get, if anything, but we're hoping we will get some additional funding to cover some of the new costs that are associated with how we're dealing with the coronavirus. But regardless of that, we still have a structural deficit at the university. And even when we cut $4.6 million out of the budget, there are only two ways to balance the budget. Either you increase revenue or you cut expenses. And we've been cutting a lot of expenses. We've increased revenue in some areas, but we've got to have a balanced budget. And going forward, we've got to really think hard about how we continue to have a balanced budget over the next, not just next fiscal year, but over the next several fiscal years. I thought it was important, and I've shown this before, and I won't go into any of the detail, but the university does provide a lot of financial aid to students. This is a breakdown of the different types of financial aid. There's also, governor made an announcement at the university about a new program. Hopefully that program will be put into place with advice from the different colleges, because it is a good program, and that'll be some additional financial aid money coming to the university. I also wanted to show you the impact on housing. You can, same 10 years. This is fall semester. We've been running her in the mid-80s, and we've taken a building offline too. Which will be demolished this summer. This is the fall semester, spring semester. There's always attrition between fall and spring, and this is the average. And as you can see, we're not filling the residence halls to capacity, and that's lost revenue to the university as well, not just in the beds, residence life, but also related to that is food service and other activities on campus too. In the past, I've been asked to present some information about headcount, so, and also include some total costs associated with headcount. So I took 4 points in time over a 14-year period, and what this presents is headcount, excuse me, headcount, and the equivalent salary dollars of full-time employees who are on active payroll in, I think it's November, the first payroll of November. Same time period over the 14 years, and I took 2005, 10, 15, and 19 to show you the comparisons and trend lines. It's by faculty, it's by major and component. Faculty, executives, professionals, secretarial, clerical, service, and technical paraprofessionals. If you look at the grand total, in 2005, we had 1,122 employees. Today, we have 1,117 employees. Same time period, same categories of employees. But when you go into the different components, and it's hard to see because it's two separate slides, there's been some changes. Faculty was at 372. We peaked around 411. As of last fall, we were at 391. In the executive area, we were at 75. Initially, we're at 54. Now, there's some changes here that are reflected in, over that time period, that you've got departments that shift between divisions. You also have classifications of employees that over the same time period might have been classified as, for example, a clerical, and the position went vacant and it got reclassified or basically due to needs in a particular department, instead of being a clerical position, were posted as a professional or paraprofessional position. So there's a lot of shifting, and particularly if you look at between secretarial clerical, where in 2005 we were at 183 employees, and that in that category of employees down to 101. But you can see that in technical paraprofessional, it jumped up from 101 to 143, and in other professionals, it went from 237 to 262. So there's been a lot of movement, not only departments moving between different divisions, but classifications of employees moving between different divisions. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the actual dollars because quite frankly, this doesn't say a lot because over 15 years, you've got salary increases, you've got people who are at the high end of the scale retiring, you've got new people coming in at lower end of the scale. We've actually had positions that we've eliminated in one classification and created new positions in other classifications. So I think the head count is a little more meaningful than the dollar amounts, but it's presented for you to analyze. And if you have any questions about that, I mean, we'll answer questions at the end, or if you think of any other questions, please send me an email, and I promise to respond. So on that note, let me present Reg again, and he'll talk about the future.
Okay, so we've looked at spring, we've looked at the implications for budget, and now as we pivot to the fall, what I wanted to do was to sort of remind the audience that there are KPIs, key performance indicators, that drive everything that we do in terms of trying to meet particular goals. There's 17 Cardinal or university KPIs. They are built around 4 priorities of the university, and those priorities in rank order are retention, enrollment, 4-year graduation rate, and job placement. These are 6 of the 17 KPIs that relate to enrollment in particular. And in the indicator column, that's the particular KPI that we are measuring. In the next column, you have the goals and the actual numbers for 2019. So as you can see, the goal was 10,351 students for 2019. We achieved 10,105 students for the fall of 2019. The goals for 2020 are all fall goals, and they're listed here and on the President's website, I believe also on the board website for the full list of 17. Also, a reminder that each division has KPIs that are tied to the 17 as well. So academic affairs has a set of KPIs, student development has a set of KPIs, marketing, enrollment management, and so on and so forth. Steve's area, we all have KPIs tied to the university 17 KPIs. So how do we decide what the number will look like for the fall? It's a process, and I'm going to sort of walk you through the process. It looks more complex than it really is, but this is the process. We start with the number of students we had last fall of 2019. We had 10,105 students. We look at the number of students that are projected to graduate, the number of students who we expect to attrit from the university, based on history, based on some trends and things that we are doing internally that might address some of these particular issues. And we arrive at the number, the number of new students needed to meet the goal by subtracting the number of students who attrit from the previous fall enrollment. This is an annual. This is all students enrolled throughout the year, not just fall, although it's looking at fall to fall. And so the expected outflow of students from the university, those are students who graduate as well as students who attrit from the university, is 4,311 students. The expected or planned inflow of students, those students admitted to the university, is 4,361 students, a difference of 50 students. So the growth from 10,105 to 10,155 students is 50 students, and the 50 students are reflected there. If you look at the little table just below that, you'll see the goals for the goals for spring and the goals for fall. So the freshman goal for spring was 40 students. We actually ended up with 60 students. Advanced standing, the goal was 510 students. We ended up at 539. Advanced standing includes transfer students, second degree, post-bac, non-degree, any student who's not a freshman or a graduate student. And the last number was the graduate student goal, which was 350 students. We ended up at 289. So the total goal for spring in terms of new enrollment was 900 students. We ended up enrolling 888 students, a difference of 12. So for the fall, and these were sort of established independent of what the census number is. So the fall and spring were established. We now know what the spring number is, 888. It's 12 short of goal. Those 12 will be added to the 3,461 students expected to come in the fall. That is 1,600 freshmen, 1,061 students with advanced standing, 800 graduate students, for a total of 3,461 students. And a total number annual of new students of 4,361 students. So the pathway there is, I think I probably just said it all, but the pathway is a new student enrollment of 4,361. The 888 we had in spring, 3,473, that's with the 12 added in, needed to meet the goal for admissions. This is not the goal for enrollment, this is the admissions goal for the fall semester. We need the completion rate, the number of students who complete, to be equal to or less than 2,307. Obviously, more students completing is a good thing because it impacts our graduation rates. But if we project wrong and 200 more students complete than we anticipate, that will lead to a shortfall because we didn't anticipate 2,507 students leaving the university because they graduated. That number is easier to project because we look at the number of students who are within 30 credits of graduating at the start of the previous fall semester. Attrition, the number of students who leave the university, 2004, we have to be less than or equal to 2,004 students in order to meet that particular goal. It's worth noting, if you haven't already, on the IE website is the most current non-returning student survey. It was produced in January, and that information is very helpful information if you want to know some of the reasons why students attrit from the university, some of the things that they tell us about their experiences at the university. I think it's important to understand that. So we're not at a loss as to why students leave the university, and they tell us why they're leaving the university. But there is a category of students that we need to focus on a little bit more, and it's an opportunity. And that is the 380 students who take leaves of absences from the university. Those students get lost. They get dropped somewhere along the way. They're not students who transferred somewhere else. These are students who told us that they were going to take a leave of absence from the university and didn't come back a year later. So I think it's incumbent upon us as stewards of this university to reach out to those students 6 weeks out after they sign up for a leave of absence, reach out to them again at the end of a given semester, the first semester that they take that leave of absence, just to check in with them to see where they stand. But it's a missed opportunity. 380 students over a 10-year period is nearly 4,000 students who've taken leaves of absences who have simply gotten lost. So that's an opportunity for us. The pathway to 10,155 includes a retention rate of first-year retention rate of 70.8 to 71.3% of the 2019 cohort. That equates in real numbers to 1,083 to 1,090. The difference between those two are not that high. Of the 1,529 first-time full-time freshmen who started in the fall. Currently, at the start of the spring semester, we are at 1,360. Which means that we have a little wiggle room of about 270 students. Less than that, and we'll achieve the first-year retention goal. More than that, and we will not achieve the first-year retention goal. It's not very complicated. It's simple math, and so I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that. The continuation rate is all students who are eligible to return the next year. The reason this is here is because it's tracked in the KPIs for enrollment management. So in support of Enrollment 2020, and this is enrollment, this is admissions and continuing students, here's some of the things that we're going to be doing. And some of you will become involved in some of these things, some of you won't, but some of you will. I will be co-chairing this summer the Summer Retention and Summer Melt Intervention Group. Last year, I think we called it simply the Retention Group, and as you can tell by the retention numbers, we didn't really achieve what we should have achieved last summer. So this summer, we'll be doing something a little bit different, and we'll be aiming specifically at reducing that 2,000 number. I know the goal is 2,004. My goal is a number below 2,000, which hasn't happened in probably ever. As far back as I could tell, we've always attrited more than 2,000 students. 2,000 students, again, over a 10-year period is 20,000 students. It's a lot of students to leave. You couple that with graduation, that's a lot of students to have to replace every year. 40% of your student body is too much. And I think that we can do a little bit of a better job in terms of trying to retain more of those students. Some of it is operational. Some of it is functional, related to the particular offices, but we'll be engaged in both sets of activities. Professional advisors will be involved in this as well. They were not included in last summer's retention committee meetings, but they will be included this year. WP 101, which you've heard, has posted some pretty good results for the fall, from fall to spring. But there are some recommendations to go along with WP 101 to make it even more successful for our student population. Using Blackboard as a course management tool. I think that's happening now because of COVID-19, but prior to that it was not. And what would happen is facilitators would have different experiences in terms of their work with their courses. Mandatory completion of the modules that you see listed here. It's important because these are important to the development of the student. And what happens if we let this go on, we end up with freshmen in the spring semester still trying to complete things that they should have completed in the fall. As it relates to immunization and as it relates to outstanding missing documents, the impact there is on the ability of the student to re-enroll. Financial aid related reasons, as well as ability to live on campus if they haven't completed the immunization information. There's another that should be added to this list that I neglected to put on this list, and that is the mitigation of health insurance, which is coming back into play for the university in the fall. And I think the WP 101 folks, well, I'm not expecting them to solve the students' problems, helping the student to mitigate or navigate the landscape to completing these is what's important. The other one, and I hear this from facilitators, is about the course materials. While I think most of the work will be in Blackboard, whenever there is supplemental information, that supplemental information should really get to the facilitators at least 4 weeks in advance, not the Friday before the next week of the classes. And I've heard you, those of you who are facilitators, and we are correcting that. So, other things that you can do to support student persistence. If you're an advisor, get to know your advisees. Spend some time with them. You can either do it face-to-face, you can do it via email, text, whichever way students feel much more comfortable communicating with you or you with them is the way to do it. You'll be amazed at how many times I speak to students and I ask them, who's your advisor? And I get blank stares. Even though if they just log on to their WP account, they could see their advisor name right there. Provide feedback early and often. Some of these will sound an awful lot like what Dr. Heldobler has been telling you guys for the last 18 months or so. They're not exactly the same because this doesn't just apply to faculty, it applies to everyone and anyone who advocates or interacts with students. Take attendance if students are in your class. Set the bar high. This idea that our students can't do this, that, or the other is such an incredible disservice to the students. And if we are to have a growth mindset, this particular perspective, a growth mindset perspective, then setting the bar high should come to be what students expect of us. Remember that students are impressed by your intellect if you're faculty, but they're equally intimidated by you. And so they may not reach out to you because they're afraid to reach out to you. In some cases, they have adjunct professors who they can't necessarily reach out to in terms of walking into an office. But your job is to try to reach out to them, get to know them. Some of the things that we're doing to support the admissions of new students from an admission or functional standpoint, we are continuing to use our predictive modeling. One of the things I've asked admissions to do is to begin to monitor the freshman checklist. And at some point real soon, we're going to switch that checklist from a paper version to a digital version. If freshmen completed the things that are on that checklist, we wouldn't be asking for missing materials in WP 101. Some of that, most of that, all of that should take place at the admissions level. And so we'll be asking them to do that. Admissions in partnership with Academic Affairs is engaged in a reach out call campaign. I think this is a good step in the right direction. I think it's even more important now since some of the spring events will be canceled or postponed in terms of face-to-face interactions. So I think those kinds of outreaches will be very, very important for us in terms of meeting the spring goal. Conversion marketing and constituency management to reduce summer melt in terms of admissions is important. Admissions engaged in this last year. I should remind the group that the last 2 years we've had the 2 largest freshman classes in the history of this university. We think we're getting to a point where we're not going to continue to be able to do that. 1,600 is the goal for this coming fall, but as numbers of high school graduates decline, And as a number of students who leave the state to go to high school continue to place New Jersey at the 49 out of 50 states, this is something that we're going to have to come to realize. I think some things are happening, some good things are happening, including an increase in graduate programs online, I think will help us in that regard. Strengthening the community college relationship is another that's sort of starting, will be sort of ramping up a little bit differently starting in the fall. We will have advisors placed at the community colleges, working with the admissions folks to help onboard transfer students, to hopefully help have them avoid what is sometimes seen as a very circuitous route to getting registered for classes in the fall or spring here at the university. This is probably a little muted based on what's happened since I put the slides together, but join us in participating in admissions events. We have postponed some of these events. Some will be rescheduled, and the rest we won't know, we'll know in the future. We don't know right now. We can tell you that the College of Education Open House, Graduate Business Programs Information Session, and Admission Saturdays, unless it's 20 students or less, Accepted Students Day is postponed or pushed back. So the new Acceptance Students Day date is the second date that you see here, with another date to follow in May, pending any further updates in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. At this point, I will open the floor to questions for either Steve or myself.
Gentlemen, we have a question from someone online, Debbie Mohammed. Is there a residence hall that is remote from other areas of the university that we could rent to generate income?
Over the years, we've actually looked at a variety of opportunities like that. And we've taken a building offline. We don't expect to replace it. So we really don't have capacity for external rentals. I mean, we do a little bit of that in the summertime, but it's really not possible because we have a current demand. We have a demand with our current students to pretty much, even though I think I said it was like 81% in the fall, 86% in the fall, average about 70%. The way residence halls are filled, you really don't have the opportunity to kind of create blocks even when you have vacancies. So unfortunately, that's really not a possibility for us.
Other questions?
What's happening with the open call campaign? Because I got an email and I agreed to do it and I haven't heard anything back. But I think the clock is ticking.
There's a mic there. I'm going to ask Associate Vice President Schneider to respond to that one.
Here, Ken. For the people who are online, it's important that you speak into the mic.
Okay. So the question.
Sure. My question was about the open call campaign. I received an email sometime back asking if I wanted to help. I said yes, but I haven't heard anything back yet.
Okay. We have an initial campaign that went out to support our scholarship brunch. We are collating and bringing that information back into the office so we can track that, and we will be coming out with our next iteration for students that aren't necessarily simply scholars, but anybody that had been admitted to the institution. Admittedly, over the last couple days, we have spent more time about rescheduling some of our events, but that's will be done simultaneously, but we are in the process of working with Provost area to get this information back out to faculty that had volunteered.
Other questions? I can't see the hand back there. Okay.
Hi, this is a follow-up question. So I've been doing the phone calls. I called 12 students that I think indicated they wanted to be CODS majors, and 11 of them didn't answer and one hung up on me. I think she thought it was like a robocall or something. So will you be tracking this to see if it's fruitful? Because if it's not fruitful, then obviously we wouldn't want to repeat it. It seems like it makes sense, make a personal connection, and I left my email address and said, if you had any questions about the major, call or an email. But I'm just wondering if it's going to be tracked.
It will be tracked. We're taking all that information that's coming back from faculty and we're logging that manually right now, rather than having faculty learn the new system, how we're entering this information. We will be doing that because we want to provide an impact statement back to faculty. One of the things I will mention that we've had a lot of conversation with faculty about students who don't answer and students that don't hang up and the like. Unfortunately, that is reality, so don't take it personally. That happens to us all the time. But we will be tracking that information, keeping it separate, and then putting together some level of report that will give you some impact of what happened, not only globally, but in your particular department as well. Part of the holdup for the next iteration, the next send out for faculty is being able to collate the responses so we know who we don't need to follow up with or contact in the next round. And until we get that information, we don't want to be coming back and forth with a student saying this is your contact, but you had been in contact, but faculty are actively having conversations with these particular faculty. So there will be some period of time between quote unquote rounds on when that information will go back to you. But yes, we have every intention to.
Well, the other thing, Professor Magaldi, is the idea that we would assess whether or not this is a good use of everyone's time. We happen to believe it is, and collecting that data will be important to establishing whether or not we tweak it a little bit or whether we do something differently. I can't see.
Josh wanted to say something. I just want to thank the folks that are doing this. I know that it's different, it's new. We didn't know what the outcome's going to be, but from my previous experience and other circumstances, it signals something to students, even if they hang up on you, even if there's not a response. But the point is a good one. We need to use the data to inform what we're doing for the best use of time. But I just want to publicly thank the folks that are doing this.
Juliana?
Thank you for the presentation. I had one question for Steve and one question for Reggie. For Steve, I have seen here trends in enrollment, trends in retention. I would like to know, since you have been here for so many years, the history of reserves. Because, of course, now the administration is under a tremendous push about the reserve. But, it's also because of the previous year. Can you please tell us something about the history of reserve?
Sure.
And the question for Reggie is, I saw for the first time, the performance indicator on job placement you mentioned. I'm very happy about that. And can you please elaborate who is responsible for job placement and what is the percentage or the number that represent the goal for job placement? Thanks.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. Thank you for acknowledging I've been here a few years. The reserves are something that's very important for any, it's not just a non-public or a university. For-profits also have reserves. And the purpose of that is twofold. One is to have a rainy day fund, and you've heard the governor talk about the state's rainy day fund. The other thing is to set aside funds for strategic investments or to be able to plan, not just immediately, but to plan for things that either operationally or in our case, and I'll give you some examples, where what we did with reserves was to basically use them to cut down the debt service or offset some of the potential debt service that the university would have to take on if we didn't have the reserves. Historically, the reserves over many years, over my lifetime here, started small, and we actually had a mechanism where, and this is where there are actually metrics that Moody's, for example, uses. There are ratios that are prescribed. Our external accountants also prescribe certain kinds of ratios that basically fundamentally says, You should not be spending every dollar that you get every year. You have to build up your reserves, and you have to build up a mechanism where you can build up reserves. And as you can see what I presented before, right now we're in a position we're spending every dollar that comes in, and this year we're actually spending more. That's not good. It's not good operationally on a short term. It's really not good on a long term. So over many, many years, what we did was we started building up reserves. We also, the Board of Trustees, and I don't remember when, they actually passed a resolution, I believe it was, or it was a vote that basically said that the university has to set up reserves, has to live within its means. And one of the things we did was we set up reserves that are very specifically rainy day funds. We also, because we were filling our residence halls, because we were also generating income from auxiliaries and other ways, as well as not spending every tuition dollar that came in, we actually built up to the reserves. I think at one point in the beginning of Kathy's tenure, we had over $100 million. I think it was $110 million, as I recall. Sounds like a lot of money. It really is not a lot of money. Because if you, and I could provide information, if you disaggregate the $110 million of where we are today, about half of that is dedicated money that we cannot spend on operational things. It's either grant money that is or dedicated funds that come in a certain way that are specific to, and most of that is really academic areas. So we can't spend about half of that because it's dedicated. And what we did strategically over the last 7 years or so, we had several capital projects. First, University Hall, Preakness, the garage, Hunziker, and Skyline. And there are two ways. We don't have the money to pay for those projects. Are like on average, they're like $40 million a project. Some of them are more or less. We didn't have that kind of cash reserves, and it was not very prudent to say, all right, let's take $40 million and just pay for a building. At the same time, the opportunities to borrow because of interest rates, and even today, the opportunities to borrow, the interest rates are extremely low. So we went through a refinancing of all our existing debt and also borrowed some additional money for those projects. We're also required by the state when we built University Hall to match. They gave us 75% of the cost. We had to match it 25%. So we elected, rather than borrow that money on all those projects, increase the debt service. Who pays the debt service? It's the students. And we didn't want to overly burden students with additional fixed costs that the university had. So we strategically took over $30 million out of those reserves to help keep the debt service down for those projects. So, and they're all around $40 million, except for I think the garage was like $27 million, but the other projects were in the $30 to $40 million. So we took over $30 million out of reserves to cover those debt service, and that's what reserves are for. Reserves are not for balancing a budget, particularly on a long term. Reserves are not for spending on annual operating expenses. Reserves are there for strategic investments, and we're dealing with COVID-19. If the state gives us money, it's on a reimbursement basis. We might have to use reserves to cover some of the costs that we currently might be incurring with this with COVID-19. You got to have reserves. You can't be bare bones, and you also have to be building reserves up. You can't be depleting reserves. It's not good financial sense.
Yeah, just one. I'll introduce you, Mickey. Dr. Camerata will speak to career development, but one of the things I do want to say about it is the job placement element of this is one of the 4 priorities. It is not listed as one of the 17 KPIs. Nikki?
Thank you. So yes, Reg, I appreciate that point because admittedly, I don't have that data right in front of me. But I think I'm pretty good with it. I don't know if Glenn or Sharon are in the room. But basically, we benchmark against a number of data points in terms of career outcomes. We look at salary. We look at how many students want to be employed. We look at once postgraduate. So we do an in-person during Pioneer Salute of the soon-to-be graduating seniors to get their intentions and plans and what's already in place. And we also do a 1-year out survey of our students who have graduated and been out in the field for a year. And we benchmark against the National Association for Career, I'm going to say educators, NACE. So we measure our success or where we need to achieve our better goals against that, as well as New Jersey job placement. So I want to say, again, don't exact quote me, and if anybody in career is there to correct me, please do, is we do an annual report, goes to cabinet, typically goes to the Board of Trustees, and I want to say we're in the high 80% in terms of self-reported, from usually an 11 to 15% response rate of the seniors, so, consider that. That there are somewhere around 88 to 90% employed, either part-time or full-time, of those who wish to be employed. Because, of course, we ask questions. They're active military, are not seeking employment, and that measures well against the different benchmarks that we're measuring against. Pay, we look at that as well. We look at internships. We generally like to see at least 50% of our students involved in some sort of internship or practicum or outside placement that supports their learning. So I think that hits the point. You got that? Is that helpful? Okay.
I know that William Patterson has chosen to semi-close down the dorms, and wondering about the students who need computer access, students who need food and shelter, because unfortunately this is their space for it, and I hope the institution is accommodating them. And do our food contracts have minimum spends for us to maintain those contracts? Are we going to reimburse the students who are not going to be on campus and using it?
Or do you want me to do it all? Okay. So I prefer, actually, I'm going to go up there. Okay, so on the question of first of all, what we're saying is the university is not closing. University will remain open post spring break. And we will operate spring break as we typically operate spring break. So everything is scaled back. There are different accommodations for resident students. The 3 weeks following spring break, we've instituted remote learning in all cases where it's possible. So there are some cases where there are, I think, labs and other things going on. And we have exercised similar to what we do during spring break. With the residents expected to leave, we know there are a certain proportion of our resident students due to hardship, homelessness, food insecurity, difficult, unsafe conditions at home. We have a process where they can present that need to us, and we will allow them to remain in the residence halls. So, for example, this spring break, COVID-19 aside, we have 43 students who remain in the residence halls because they meet those different criteria. And we convey this very clearly to resident students, but we do have a limited capacity and ability to do that. So it is very measured. These added weeks, we are exercising that same process, but of course we're also considering the students who need to be here for courses that are still being offered on campus, or are need to be here for other critical needs that the university has presented or created for them. In terms of technology and all the services it needs, food, Yes, the dining services will continue, meal plans will continue to be available to students, but as you could understand, at a much more scaled back degree based on the need, which we don't completely know yet. So as Residence Life gets those requests from students beyond the 43, we'll have a better sense of what the need is in terms of meal plan. Also, if students are in commutable distance and they want to come to campus to use the meal plan, to use the library, to use computer labs, they can continue to do that. So I will be sending, remember the president's communication yesterday was sort of the hard and fast broad, and we said that we would be coming back, different VPs, to communicate with students further. And it has evolved, not daily, but hourly. You know, what I would have said this morning is going to be a little bit different this afternoon. So a communication will be going to our resident students, all students, this afternoon or tomorrow morning, and our resident students today. It's already draft and ready to roll to talk to them about some of this process. And then the other services like library, computer labs, technology, we're discovering and unfolding as we go. You know, this is sort of a moving target and extraordinary circumstances, but I know, and all my colleagues can say the same, because we've been in lots of emails and conversations, we're talking about the library, computer labs, what the implications are for students' support services. Counseling, health, and wellness will remain open so long as it's safe for them to remain open. We have remote services. We can do counseling remotely. We already have call-in services. Jill and her team, which have been tremendous, have been working on how to deliver other support remotely as well. So there are a number of ways that we're looking to modify what we do. Tutor.com, we heard about in Senate recently. So there are lots of things we can do remotely, and there are many things we'll continue to do here. So I spoke a little broadly, but I figured you're focused on students and our worry about students, and I want to allay some of that and tell you that we'll continue to communicate. Please tell them to make sure that they're checking the website. We're not going to keep writing letters. We're going to keep pointing to them to the special website that's been established. So the FAQs are going to change daily. And we'll change them, but we got to rely on people to keep looking there. So please help them to remain calm. We have a week of break so we can settle and repoint and figure out what we do next. So we're not going to have all the answers at once for each other, for them. So we just need patience and forbearance. But whatever we can do to help calm and reassure, we will.
Any other questions? I can't see what you put. Oh, President Haldalva, did you want to? Sure. Okay.
So thanks everyone who came out today, and for those of you who are watching online. You know, I want to just go back a little bit to the reserve question. You know, it keeps coming up and it keeps coming up and it keeps coming up, and we keep giving the same answer and we keep giving the same answer. But what I want you to understand is right now what we're in is a reason why you have the reserve. We don't know what the long-term impact of this is going to be. How will it impact our retention or our enrollment? The fact that we're having to delay accepted students' days and that some of our recruitment activities, we don't know how that will impact. This is a case where you can really go back to the board and say something really unusual happened, and in order to balance the budget, we may have to take something out of the reserve to move forward. So, but to Steve's point, we keep asking, the question keeps getting asked, and I just want to reiterate that my underlying feeling is, why can't you just balance the budget always on the reserve? A, because we haven't been adding to it consistently, and B, over time, then you have no reserve. And then you move into what we call endowed reserves or earmarked reserves, and financially, that's a problem on so many levels. In terms of Moody's, in terms of your accreditation, it just presents problems over and over again. But in closing, I just want to say, say it's been a week. It has been a week, and I think it's been a week for a lot of us. And I'm proud of everyone on the team, everyone who has been here, who's been dancing as fast as they possibly can to deal with new information as it is coming in, to Jill Guzman and her team, and to all of the people who have worked to get us this far. Thank you. And I'm hoping what Mickey said is true, that now that we have spring break, we'll get a little bit of breathing room. But I will tell you that what Dr. Camaradas has said is true. the information changes hourly. And we're doing our best to get it updated and get up on the website as quickly as we can. And we're trying to address students' needs as quickly as we can. And we know that to the faculty who are moving online, you're dancing as fast as you can to try to get stuff up and running as well. But as I said to you in the State of the Union address, and I continue to believe it, I know that our true north is to do best by the students. And true north is that way. So keep doing what you're doing. Please know also that everyone is doing their professional level best and making the next right decision based on the information that's in front of them. So while you may think that's not the right thing, or you may question it, please know that everybody is assessing it and just trying to do the next right thing. And if everybody follows their true north, we will come out on the other side of this. We will be different, right? But we will come out on the other side of it. And by different, I mean, we will have more experience with online learning. We will have better understandings of what our students' our needs are outside of spring break. You know, if they can go home, if they can't go home, are there different kinds of supports that we should need, that we should employ? We will begin to understand what the financial impacts of something like this on a university is, and we are building better relationships with our local agencies in terms of the health department, the hospitals, and those are all good things, even though we're in the middle of this horrible pandemic. But I thank you for your patience. I thank you for your good work. And I hope that when Friday comes, or if you have Saturday classes, when Saturday comes, you all go home, put your feet up a little bit, hang out with the people that you care about, eat ice cream, drink wine, watch TV, whatever that is for you, do it. And then we'll come back and we'll regroup afterwards. But thank you all for coming today. Bye.